Okay, so calling this work session to order on November 16th, 2021. Do I need a roll call or it's not for?
We have a quorum.
Okay. We have an agenda. Does anybody have anything to add or delete from the agenda?
Did everyone get their packets?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they're all electronic.
Almost all.
My packet had a couple weird things in it, but the computer did a couple weird things to it, where they duplicated words on top of each other. But
Oh, that is weird.
huh?
That is weird.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, why don't we go into our first item?
Yeah, so we're
Administration.
this is the review of the Title 15 dwelling, lodging, and housing definitions. As you know, it's very close to, it's come before Planning and Zoning and Council to be approved multiple times, but I believe at our last meeting, when it was brought up, that it was requested that we review the definition of substance abuse treatment center, or treatment facility. And so I've provided some examples in the packet of how Anchorage has defined a similar facility in their zone. They don't call it a substance abuse treatment facility, they call it a correctional community residential center. And that's on page 26 of the packet. So if you haven't looked at that already, you can see how they've defined it. And then I've also included an example of the city of Soldotna, how they define, and they also don't use necessarily the term substance abuse treatment facility. They use a community residence, and then number 3 under their definition is a correctional community residential center. There's a lot of similarities between the two definitions that Anchorage and Soldotna use, primarily focusing on, it is a short-term temporary detention of people transitioning from a correctional institution, undergoing the rehabilitation and a recovery from legal infirmity or substance abuse. But that it doesn't include people who pose a threat or danger to the public for violent or sexual misconduct, or who are imprisoned or physically confined under guard. And so I can't remember exactly. I believe it was right, Craig. You had requested more of a substantial definition there on substance abuse treatment facility. So I don't know if that kind of provides more, if those examples from Anchorage and Soldotna provide more of what you were wanting, or if any.
It's real close, but I did notice on page 27, I think is that still Soldotna?
27 would still be Anchorage.
Okay, so 27, item 3A. The only thing on that one, it had a pretty good definition, I thought. Up until it started talking about people under the age of 18.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we could possibly combine those two, because
I like the one on definition from Anchorage on, what was it, 20, I just scrolled past it, 26. I think that was a pretty decent definition and encompassed a lot of information within it.
If
Yeah, I
if
really-
you're particularly looking for a substance abuse place, I would definitely distinguish between a correctional rehabilitation place versus a regular drug treatment place. Because as you know, Anchorage has both of those. You have Aquila, you have Clitheroe, and a few of these other ones, but you also have the halfway houses, which have substance abuse treatment within themselves. So I think a sharp distinguisher would probably be in the best interest for that, I think. And that's what I think is your community residential one where it's referring on page 20, yeah, on 26. I think when you, it is good, but I also would caveat the part where when they start going to age groups and the rest, I think that's problematic because that's when you start getting minors and things in there as well. I think in another one, I don't know if it was Soldatna's where you're talking about a time limit for those, less than 6 months. I don't know if you want to necessarily hamstring or if you want to put a time limit on that or not. I mean, I don't know what you were looking for when you were seeking to have a clarification.
I just wanted some sort of definition because there
Right.
was no definition at all. You know, what I liked on the Correctional Community Residential Center was that it did not include people who pose a threat or danger to public.
Yeah.
I thought that line was something we definitely need in there. And I don't think it would mess up anybody's intention.
I think that's a good line to have in for sure.
So are you discussing anything that's going to transition out of a correctional facility? Because that sort of one implies that you're going to have somebody transitioning in there but you have to assess to see that they're not a threat to the community and the rest. How do you necessarily determine that if it's just some regular person that is undergoing substance abuse treatment? There have to be an intake assessment to see if the person is adequately categorized as safe or not.
I agree, and I can't speak for the people that run that facility, but I'm sure there's an intake process, and I don't think this would be misaligned from what they're already doing.
I did request input from Tommy Glanton, who's a licensed clinical social worker, just to see how he would define substance abuse treatment facility. And he said that he would actually use the term substance use disorder treatment facility, since the term substance abuse is apparently out of date within that field. So that's something that we could change just change it to substance use disorder treatment facility. And then he said that he would define it as a licensed facility that provides a therapeutic planned regimen of substance use treatment and education services for persons in the early stages of recovery from addiction who require safe and stable living environments in order to develop recovery skills. Services are provided on-site in a 24-hour live-in setting with 24-hour per day staffing. So that was his suggestion, which is kind of a combination of things in Soldotna and Anchorage code as well. But also, like you said, we could add in that the individuals there don't, well, as it says in Anchorage, doesn't include people who pose a threat or danger to the public for violent or sexual misconduct.
Yeah,
I like that.
I think adding that last sentence to what Mr. Glanton proposed would be great.
Okay.
I think that would make it align with all the other definitions. You guys?
I'm good with that.
Are there any other additions you want me to make to that definition in particular, or just make those changes? I'll change it to substance use disorder treatment facility, we'll use the definition that Tommy Glenn has provided, adding in that it does not include people who pose a threat or danger to the public for violent or sexual misconduct. Does that
Yep.
seem?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely green like that.
Yeah.
Okay. I think the other, if there are other topics on the definitions that you want to review, we can do that. The other question that we need to look at is whether we want to look at the employee campground changes that were proposed by the city manager, if we want to just leave employee campground as it is currently stated in city code and pass this resolution as it was at our previous work sessions.
I'd like to look at that employee campground and for adding back in the 150 days that was taken out.
Okay, and yeah, that was suggested to take out, but it wasn't ever taken out. We can just put it back to the
Yeah.
original. Yeah. Okay.
Is that because it's highlighted in yellow and then you had the green? Is that because that was modified to some extent? Because the original one, it was crossed out completely, and then we obviously decided to put it back in, but now it's highlighted in yellow, and then the paragraph 2 is in green. I'm not sure what those colors indicate. I was looking for the...
So yeah, sorry. Yellow is the current wording in code, and green was the suggested addition.
Okay.
So green would be, we would just remove that and just leave in the yellow, which is the current wording in code. And I printed out just a brief, I gave you, also this is what is written in code currently for.
Right.
So that is, if we just wanted to pass the changes that we've been working on, specifically related to lodging, dwelling, housing, and not touch employee campground, this is how it currently is stated in city code, and we would leave it like that and just pass a resolution for an ordinance changing city code just regarding the lodging, dwelling, housing that we've reviewed for the past year.
I'm going to hear from commissioners first. I'll ask commissioners first for their comments, and then I'll ask the audience. So, commissioners' comments on.
Well, I want to make sure that the employee campground, we get the 150 days, because if it's allowed longer than 150 days, then it's not a mobile unit or a campground, it's a permanent structure. It needs to adhere to, other guidelines. I'm okay with city council being able to, add on to that, but I don't want it just indefinite campgrounds, here we go, mobile campgrounds. Kind of how it is set now.
I also like that, I saw the letter from, is it Brian O'Leary? From OBI.
Mm-hmm.
And, it sounds like there's quite the opportunity with Black Cod coming up. And as long as there's an option where he could basically ask city council for a resolution to extend that so they could take advantage of that, unusual amount of extra fishing, that production that could happen this year. As long as there's something in here for that, I think that's fine.
Yeah, I agree. I'm fine with the council being able to extend it. I just don't want somebody to set up a mobile structure and just have it be there forever. I want some sort of check on it every so often to be like, are you still using it? Is it, significant? Yes, you can go a little further. Make sure, the ducks are all in a row instead of just have a permanent shantytown.
So my question too is, because it has a thing where it says no earlier than April 15th, is there a provision in case something, I don't know anything much about fishing, but, for it to come any sooner if they, petition the city council to be able to do that? my concern is, they have something early, then they, can just continues through, and then it winds up being longer, and it may be just a, episodic kind of thing as opposed to a permanent structure, which you're referring to. I think that wouldn't be a good thing. But I just don't know, do we have to write in there the caveats for before and after, or we just give write it up and say that they have the opportunity to extend prior to or afterwards for the 150 days?
I don't know if
Gonna
they're,
extend either way.
Yeah, I would hope. I
Yeah.
guess that's the thing. Again, I don't know much about fishing, but I don't know what the significance of April 15th is.
I don't either, but I suspect that they can bring it to council and extend either way.
Yeah, I would hope. That's
Yeah.
the only thing I wanted to be sure that,
Yeah.
that they have that ability to do that.
I just had one other question. I'm trying to see if it's in here deeper or not. As far as the difference between temporary and permanent, that has to do with the foundation, and I'm going to ask Fire Chief on
It's
this.
not just the foundation, there's a whole host, if you want to call this a permanent structure. We're not going to design and engineer it for you or for the customer. We would require stamped architectural and structural engineer drawings verifying that it meets permanent structure requirements. I would just give you a couple of the top ones. It would be obviously a permanent foundation. These are sleeping quarters, so you'll need to have an egress, means of egress. Doesn't matter how small it is. Somebody throws a Molotov cocktail at the front door. How do you get out? There's no other window or door. The heating and ventilation systems would have to be up to code, electric up to code. Snow loads would have to be verified. They can handle the snow loads and the wind loads. So there's, again, we're not going to design it and say, if you do these 4 things, it's a permanent structure. It's a lot more than that, and we would require, again, the engineer and architect drawings to verify that they're signing off that it's okay. And then we would feel good about inspecting them. But as it stands right now, they're, at least the ones at OEI, are currently permanent connexes. And therefore we should not be inspecting those. That's why we put in the CUP to recommend those caveats, those self-attestations that they're safe, and put it back on OBI's responsibility and not on us.
Yeah, if they're gonna be there more than 150 days, to me it seems like they need to be inspected or term permanent, but, that's just me. I mean, leaving them year after year after year is a permanent structure, and it's a health and safety hazard. If they're a mobile structure, they need to be able to move. But if they're gonna leave them for years and years, which have been happening, then they need inspection.
And is there, Chief, is there what code does that go by for them to be permanent or temporary?
International Building Code 2012 currently for the state. We are soon to be adopting the 2018, but that hasn't happened yet.
Okay. So
We're also looking at this further down the line when other seafood plants are now putting in applications to do the same that have already self-admitted that we want to do year-round fishing. So we've kind of gotten this catch-22 of what are these things called, because I can't define it. And so if I can't define it, I can't inspect it. So
Right.
But you can define it as temporary versus permanent.
if it's there for 180 days and then removed, which I know is a kind of a silly nuance, that's how the code's written. You can change the code, and council's privy to change it, but that's how temporary structures are written. And it's to prevent them sitting for years and years and maybe forgotten about or abandoned, or Icicle starts downsizing their force and they just leave them for 20 years. I mean, I don't know 100 reasons why, but that's why it's written. And that's why we did have temporary building permits for them since 2009, was they were to be removed, come back, meet the code. Can't really say much about that.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. I am calling in the teleconference line because we might have a representative from OBI
Oh, okay.
that wants to listen in, and I apologize, I forgot.
Chief, is there what do the other communities do as far as temporary? Because Cordova, Dillingham, the rest, do they move them, or do they have them specifically, are they temporary or are they permanent housing?
A lot of the jurisdictions that have been mentioned in the past, they're not a deferred jurisdiction in a first-class city like we are.
So the outside, the city limits kind of thing, is that?
Some of them are either outside or those jurisdictions didn't take on the deferment like we did. We took the deferment from the state to do our own plan reviews
Okay,
and inspections. Other communities, I don't believe Cordova is deferred. I would have to research that for sure, but a lot of these kind of fishing villages, especially Tyonic, and those are not deferred, so there essentially is no code. So it's, you know, I know Petersburg is a very small community, and they all have apartments it's an apartment building for their workers.
right.
So yes, they are out there. Maybe they're P&Z or council wrote a special ordinance or code for that, but we can't find anybody that's kind of the same situation as we are that are outright allowing them for permanent structures.
Well, it sounds like we're trying to get temporary housing for a near year-round industry, and we're trying to do a workaround in some cases. I don't know, some of these, these modular things that are, I know they use it up on the slope and they're year-round up on the slope. Is that the same kind of thing that can be potentially done here for our folks,
So there was a gentleman who did come, if you'll remember, last fall, I'm sorry, and wanted to bring one of the man camps from the slope down here. Again, bringing any structure inside of our jurisdiction requires it to be to code.
Right.
And it did not. It was from the 80s, and no architect or engineer would sign off that it was compliant, and so that squashed the project.
Well, I would like to see them be permanent, but I'm fine with having it 150 days. And if council wants to take it on themselves to renew it, let them keep going and going, that's on their shoulders. But I want to have a time limit on it. I think that they should have been made permanent. But if they're not moving them, I want to have a time limit. Council can decide whether they want to adhere to that or not.
And I think we can, or are you guys done with your comments?
Yeah.
on that? And we can open it up to other folks. Do they need the state name and?
I don't think so.
He's not on yet.
Pardon?
I'm texting him.
Do
No, I'm
any
sorry.
of the public need to state their name, or they can just?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Well, I'll give you my name anyway. Blaine Garterson, and I own Mod City, and I lease it to OBI. I think it would help if I gave you just a little bit of a history on why it was created. And we had a problem with public drunkenness. There was the parks were full of the workers because they had no place to go. We had a sexual assault almost every week. We had sickness down there. They were living in wet, cold, damp environment, and they were working in a wet, cold, damp environment. And then they'd go around town, you'd see them in the bank, and everybody would be wheezing, they'd have mold in their lungs, and it was a problem. And so I worked down there in another capacity of a trucking company. And I saw this, and I came up with this idea because I run into something similar earlier in my life. And I presented it to ISIC, and they go, well, we don't want to spend the money. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll build you a prototype and see if you like it. So I built a prototype, and they liked it. And so I went back to them and said, let's try to make this work. So I came to the city, and the city absolutely bent over backwards. I mean, we had a meeting with the community development director, the fire chief, the building department, the electric department, and we said, this is what we want to do. How can we do it? And they said, well, they got the code books out. We sat in a room, and we came up with how we lay them out, and everybody, put in their idea. Without the city of Seward and the department heads, this thing never would have got off the ground because it's non-typical. It's just not a typical solution to a problem. The people who, other communities have similar problems, like Los Angeles and Portland and Seattle, and they don't have a solution. They just still have the tents out there, and everything's out in the public. This is professionally managed, and it solves a big community problem. Is it ideal? No, but it fixed a big problem. Now, fast forward 10 years, and now it seems like the solution is now the problem. So, just a little bit of history, I think, helps just to know that the city was a partner in this and making this happen. And then, of course, the problem is always, you know, you gotta move them. And so, when I move them, I have to bunch them together. So I have to do maintenance down there. It's just a lot easier for me to do maintenance. And I don't wanna move them, that's for sure. But every time I did leave them there, I got permission from the city. I would go in and I would talk to Stefan at the time, and then he'd pass it up the food chain, and either I'd get permission or I wouldn't. If I didn't, I had to pull them out of there, and if I did, I left them there. This year, we're going in, we're repainting all the units. It's really handy to do it right there, because it's plugged in, they have power. Last year, we put new floors in all of them. It takes a lot of maintenance. I realize this is not a typical deal, but it solved the problem. The 150 days no longer is adequate for the industry, because the industry changed a little bit. Before, this was just a summertime deal. Well, now it's changed a little bit. But you're not going to get these big seafood companies to plank down and you know, build a $5 million bunkhouse. They're just not going to do it. And so, what do? You know, I'd like to add a little time to it. They're only going to be used less than 50% of the time. Even in a full, when you say, you know, they're going to be fishing all the time, that hasn't happened here in Seward in 30 years. And I don't foresee that changing. There's pollock season, which the new Bornsteins across the bay is going to participate in, but I don't think OBI is. And then there's black cod this year. They extended the season. OBI is not participating in it this year, but you know, the reservation-based seafoods is. And so it's a fluid thing. Like I said, just, you know, it's not the perfect solution, but it is a solution. And I'm not involved with OBI other than that I lease it to them. But I had to come up with the $750,000 to build this thing. And, you know, I came up with the solution. That just happened to be my solution. And the city was a partner in that, and I appreciate that. And I'd like them to continue to be a partner.
I have a question for you, Blaine. What do you think it would cost or take to get them to a permanent status?
Well, I'm working on that. The problem is, once again, you get to the code, and I'm dealing with a non-typical, you know, structure. So, like the chief said, there's a whole bunch of things that I don't have a problem with. I don't think meeting those things, because these things are steel cans. I mean, they're built to much higher standards than you know, a home would be. The problem is the continuous foundation, which makes absolutely no sense when you're dealing with a freight container, because a freight container is corner supported, whereas a building, it needs to be supported all the way around. And so my solution would be to use helical piles. But the problem with that is the city code doesn't allow piling. And the definition of a piling, that was probably put in the code, was either a wooden piling like you see in the boat harbor, not a engineered system like a helical pile. So once again, the code, it always boils down to the code. So the code would once again have to be changed. And whether that, you know, the city would want to do that or not, you know, I don't know. But it always boils down to the code. And we could, you know, continue on and you know, removing them is, I used to move them across the street. So I'd have them over here, and I had also the lot across the street. When I was done with them, I just simply moved them 100 feet away. Well, that was, people go, what are you doing? That's the stupidest thing I've ever done. And I go, hey, that's what I got to do. So yeah, they're changing use. They're going from living quarter status to storage status. So they're staying in the same place, but the use changes. They're just being stored at that point. Whether I store them there or store them out of my property out on Nash Road or store them somewhere else, it's kind of semantics. But you know, the code is I'd like to see them change the code and to meet the industry's needs. But that's you guys'.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Brian O'Leary has joined us.
Oh, okay, great. Did he want to say anything?
Brian, did you have any comments?
No, not at this time. I was just, obviously I submitted some public comments that got contributed, and just kind of here to work through any questions that come up and hopefully clarify things just so everyone's kind of on the same page and understanding of what we're kind of asking and what the work group would like to do going forward.
Carrie, you had a comment?
Yes, I did spend quite a bit of time on my comments, which I sent to you on Friday, in hopes that you would have had a chance to read them by this meeting. I don't know if you did. But I'm really concerned about continuing the use of storage containers modified for living containers for the future. I think I had a plan in here. Are you guys familiar with my comments? Did you have a chance to read them?
No.
No? Okay, well, sometimes wonder why you spend time on stuff. So, I'm really concerned about the chief's comments, that these cannot be inspected. So, we are allowing people to live in a potentially unsafe housing. This is housing. I would like to have, and I listed here some real minimum things. Oh God, I mean, there's a lot of changes that I would like to see. I would like to see a phased plan. Maybe I'll just summarize that, because I do appreciate that it is expensive to build a bunkhouse. We almost had one in '98, and or sometime last century, and they backed out. But we need a long-term plan and a legal contract to negotiate with the seafood processors to allow connexes for a limited time while phasing in humane, safe housing that complies with city code. Life safety issues must be addressed immediately. The plan will allow more time for the seafood processors to plan and finance permanent bunkhouses while providing safer connex housing. Annual CUP and fines for non-compliance should be included to provide incentives to accomplish the goal of bunkhouses. So the connexes should be properly addressed to conform with uniform sequential numbers for each connex with ABC for each unit by April of this next year. Right now they're not addressed for safety. The code will be changed by April 22 to require code review and life safety inspections of connex housing and compliance like every other housing by CUP. The right-of-way will be cleared along Northwestern Circle, including the cul-de-sac, by April by CUP. Right now I don't know if maybe the chief could address that, but the cul-de-sac, the platted circle at the end of Northwestern Circle, it's got boats and stuff in it. So I don't know if a fire truck could even swing around to get in there. So these are just really important safety things. The dumpsters are just rusty and the lids are all over the place. That's not right. And I'm glad to hear that they will be repainted this year because they look really terrible.
I just painted them.
Well, the doors need painted too. The connexes should be relocated to maintain a 10-foot clear spacing between the units, a fire lane established, and the chain link fence along the right-of-way removed by November or earlier to allow this emergency access. Connexes will provide adequate off-street parking spaces according to code by November. And then the use of membrane structures in housing will be banned by November 22. Connexes will be reconfigured to provide single occupancy with opening window, exhaust fan, and other listed items by November 23 by CUP. Code will be changed by April 23 to permit improved connex units to be permanent structures for a fixed time frame. Until then, they are temporary structures and must be moved after 150 days. When the time expires, they will be replaced by bunkhouses. Code will be changed by April 23 to permit improved Connex units with suitable insulation and other improvements to be used year-round and not restricted to 150 days for a fixed time frame by CUP. When the time expires, they will be replaced by bunkhouses. One new bunkhouse will be completed by November 25 and the second one by November 27. And the connexes will be phased out by November 27. So that's just a phased plan to go from connexes that we have now that are not safe or humane to improved connexes with life safety and health measures that can be inspected. And then our goal is to have our seafood housing in bunkhouses. So I would like to strike from the code the term employee campground and change it to housing seafood processing workforce, because that's the only place we want this to happen. And then you can have it be modified connexes up to bunkhouses, but get rid of the tents. They're horrible. And for all the reasons that have been listed, connexes are a step above that. So that's what I would like to see from this meeting, that we strike the term employee campground, change it to under housing, seafood processing workforce, and then move forward with his plan to go to something that the chief can inspect for life safety issues, reorganize it so that he can get in there with his fire truck if needed. There's parking, and it's not a slum.
Thank you for your comment. Blaine?
Yeah, okay, just address a few of those things. They have addresses. There's 1 through 36, A, B, C, and D, every unit. No injuries in 10 years. Painted them last year. Yes, the doors are on schedule to be painted. The spacing of the units was addressed and okayed and suggested by the city of Seward. The fire lane in between it, the 20-foot, was brought to us by the fire chief himself. He says that's what he wanted. There's 12 feet between units right now, which was also the fire people okayed. Parking, these people don't have cars. They come from the lower floor. They don't drive. Yeah, I don't know how you've been down there in the wintertime. They've got, or in the summertime, they've got close to 400 employees, and they've got nobody drives it. It's just not the type of people that they have. Exhaust fans, every unit has exhaust fans on a timer, and it replenishes the air. It's got a 24-hour timer on it. They're insulated. They have an R30 in the ceiling, an R20 in the floors, R15 in the walls. They were inspected when they were built. The building department was down there through every stage. Stephen went through it and said, okay, okay, okay. I had to do fire spread analysis for all the materials that went into the things. Tents haven't been down there for years. They're completely been replaced. And they do yearly inspections of them. They come down there, they check the electrical, they check to make sure the smoke alarms work.
Who's they?
I believe the fire department and also.
Okay.
Yeah. And they'll find things that are wrong, and we have to go. They give us a list. We have to go in and fix it. So 90% of what you said, you need to.
So it'll be easy.
Call me.
It'll be easy. It'll be easy to do.
Because
this is good news.
yeah.
I did think that the what you're calling the 10-foot or 12-foot, it looked like it had the electrical unit, the heads in it. I'm not sure what that's called. But it looked like, at least on the south side, it looked like there was, in that egress, it looked like there were electrical boxes you know.
Yeah.
So we
So
do-
any other, this is not a debate,
Anyway,
so,
right, but I don't think it's clear space, and it's not the
Okay.
10 feet separation that's required by code.
It's 12.
okay, thank you for your
Hey, Skip
comment.
Ryerson, this is city limits. So I'm gonna give a little history lesson here real quick. Been here in this town for over 45 years, worked for the seafood industry. Some of you have been around as well. In the 70s, this town was a fishing town. There was no tourism. There was no travel on the highway with Winnebagoes. Camping was limited. Fisheries, fisheries, fisheries. Probably 90% of the people in this town worked at Icicle Seafoods. Exxon Valdez took care of that. So they just demolished what fisheries we had in Prince William Sound. So it brought the demise to us. Once again, just like we re-identified ourselves from the earthquake to fishing in the 70s, we had to do again. So Exxon Valdez hits, and then we have to convert again to re-identify ourselves. Then we become a tourist-based town. But there's still a strong economic base in this town that we can't overlook, and that's fishing. Fishing in town at OBI across the bay. And how did they become OBI? Well, it used to be Icicle Seafoods. Petersburg Fisheries, Icicle Seafoods, New England Fish Company. The mergers continued, and then Icicle Seafoods forms up with OBI, and they take over. The story to that is that it's not that strong of a base. You have to have fishery resources here to keep those fisheries vibrant. And so, you know, you can see that they've been evolving, they've been adapting, they've been improvising and bringing about more practical housing space in this town. I commend those in the city and those in the private sector who've come to some of these solutions. They didn't pull them out willy-nilly, and they made investments, and they kept this fisheries going in this town. It provides a property tax base, a sales tax base, fishing tax comes to our community. So, you know, I think what I'm trying to wrap up and say is, you know, we need to all, step back, get at the 10,000 foot level, and look at what made this town great, and what we need to continue to have here. And I'm not talking about bending rules, Chief. I'm talking about working with what we have in this community. You know, you mentioned Dellingham and Naknek and Dutch Harbor and Kodiak. And you know, if we're gonna throw down on the code and we're gonna become Anchorage, then let's get it out there so that these businesses can plan for that day. Either they don't want to, they can no longer afford to meet the code, and it's time for them to move on, because they've got choices. They'll move to Cordova, or they'll move to Kodiak, or they'll move to Homer. So it's a resource that they can take their operations elsewhere. They prefer not to. We prefer them in this town not to, because they're a contributor. But I think we need to, you know, look at this thing a little bit more holistically, try to come together as a group. We did it before, and we can do it again, and start putting our heads together. It's a good conversation, but put our heads together to see what we can do next. Throwing down on them to build a $10 million housing project to today's codes, maybe it's 15 million, you know, as somebody said, it's cost prohibitive for these guys nowadays, you know, especially in this COVID era where who knows what the costs would escalate to. So I think there's solutions out there, and I appreciate y'all bringing this matter up, and working through it over a period of time, I think, would be a practical approach. But let's be mindful that we want these folks and others to remain in this town. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments on the campground definitions?
I just wanted to acknowledge that we fully understand the value of the living units and the fisheries themselves. This has been going on since 2009. I spoke with the former plant manager, Charles McAdowling, and he said it was never his intention for these to be long-term. I didn't bring it because I didn't know we were going this in-depth on OBI. I've got all the files from day one of this. You're right, administration and Icicle worked together. It was always told it was going to be a temporary solution. There's a letter from former Fire Chief Squires that says, yes, I'll grant this one-time exception to leave them on site to do maintenance. So it was always in their mind that these were temporary structures. And as long as they were temporary structures, they didn't have to be removed. And just a little point of order, and that's a difference we need to work on code-wise. It's 150 days for employee campgrounds. It's 180 days from us. We allow 180-day permits. I just wanted to let you know there was a difference in that. But you're right, times have changed, and I just don't want to see this become a Connex city like some other areas. And we have a whole industrial area across the bay that is starving for housing as well. And next thing you know, that's all that's going to be over there. We've already got an application for another CUP for the exact same thing. So there needs to be a definition. If you want to leave these, and this is what the city is, that's their will to provide that kind of housing forever, then I would just encourage you to define them in your own way. Don't call them a structure, a building, a housing unit. Call them a Connex. Or you said there's also the term?
Dry van.
Dry van. That way, there's no misconstrued, nobody has an issue with it. You're going to allow them as is, and then the whoever holds the CUP will be fully liable for doing their own self-inspections and making sure their people are safe. These things do blow over. They do have issues, but there's certainly ways around that. And make them permanent, then make them permanent. But I think defining them would be an option to go. That way we're not rolling through the mud of temporary structures and having to move. I agree, that's probably not the best for these units to be moved. But once we don't follow code for one person in one place, it snowballs and it makes our lives difficult when we get a complaint. Oh, so-and-so didn't take his tent down yet, and so-and-so hasn't moved this building yet, so I guess I'll leave mine. And it makes administration's job extremely difficult. And then we end up focusing hours and hours of man hours to try to resolve this situation. The OBI file is this thick, and there's no reason in that. I mean, it shouldn't be. That's just my 2 cents. If you have anything else.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that, Chief. And I appreciate everything we're hearing, and I do realize that economics in our community is essential. And having a good economic base is essential, but also having codes and sticking with codes and having a safe, growing environment. I kind of liked, not everything Carol said, but where you were kind of going with a progressive plan that everybody sits down and kind of figures out. I would like to see us go more in that direction. That maybe it is like a 5-year plan that everybody agrees to, and maybe in the meantime we have a temporary, or I hate to say temporary, but we have a definition for dry vans. But then the dry vans, just like the tents, have to be gone by a certain date. And we give these businesses an opportunity and an expectation to grow into the next phase. Just like we grew from tents to Connexes, then maybe Connexes to something more permanent. So that's where I kind of like to see the direction going. I'm not sure exactly how P&Z does that or how City Council would accept doing that. So I will ask administration to give us some guidance after they have a chance to figure it out.
Yeah, as far as setting up the long-term plan, we would need to get guidance from administration. Obviously, there is always the option of changing code. I would suggest if you do want to entertain some changes right now that we do a separate resolution just focusing on employee campgrounds and go ahead and move the housing, dwelling, and lodging definition resolution forward so that that can be moved on to City Council, and then we can work on the employee campground changes to code. The other thing that we can do right now in this work session, besides entertaining the changes to code right now about employee campgrounds, is to review what requirements you guys would like to see and in correlation with our chief and his recommendations, but what requirements we should make with these upcoming CUPs, you know, the ones that we know of and potential ones in the future, because that is the most pressing issue since December 7th will be discussed.
Okay. I had one other comment on this too, and I think it's close to impossible, but What about changing the districts? I saw when I looked at Cordova, they had like a harbor industry district, and then they had a business district, and then they had different definitions and things for each of their districts. Is that potentially an option?
So like adding in a new zone?
Mm-hmm. Or would that be too, I mean,
I suppose it's always a possibility.
okay.
I would have to get back with you on the process.
But I don't know if that'd be an easier solution in the long run to have the fish processing, kind of like what Carol was saying, a different definition for fish processing, or have the fish processing areas of town be zoned a little bit differently.
And
then we could work those without having to impact everything else in town.
right. Currently, employee campgrounds are only allowed within an industrial zone with the CUP. But the industrial zones are quite large.
Well, I'd like to see, like Kirk talked, a progression towards something larger and less transient. But I think maybe that's council's kind of, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like that's more down their alley to, headline and get going, and then hand that off to us. I think, we should just keep these days in for movement on them. They're a mobile structure. That way we can move forward on the ones coming up, and then maybe ask council if they want to work with us or work with Seafoods or somebody and trying to outline something that's, a half a decade or a decade off that can solve this issue later. But for right now, we don't want them there forever, unless they're going to be safe for people. We need them. So, I hate to say it, but let's stick with our moving and solve the little problem right now.
So for right now, they either need to be moved or
council has to
needs
say.
to.
Yep. And then
I wanted to direct a question to that, to Brian. If you can, you still there, Brian?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Brian, but, if we don't change the code at all and don't change the definitions on the employee campgrounds right now, there is a caveat in there that to extend the 150 days, a resolution could be done by council to extend that for certain circumstances. Do you think, is that something that would be advantageous to you guys economically for this upcoming season?
Yeah, when I outlined in my letter, regarding that, we do depend upon these starting April, not the full complement of units, but we do need at least 3 to 4 of them, starting April, and then having them go through all the way until November, because, we are active buying blackcod and halibut in April, May, September, October, and a little bit in November, that we're not active doing salmon. We're only doing halibut and blackcod during those months. If we would like to participate in that, it's not super lucrative, but it gets a good steady workforce in place for us for salmon season. And so yes, it would be, long story short.
Okay. Blaine first had something to skip.
Just in these off seasons when they're not doing salmon, there's very few in them. But during the salmon season, there's 200 people in them. So that they're there, the whole thing is there, but there's very few of them actually being used. This year, I think towards the end of the season, there's, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 of them. And yeah.
And that kind of fits in, keying off to Blaine's comment, was, due to COVID, we don't want to put more than 2 people in a room realistically in case something happens, right? Keep our workforce safe and keep the community safe. And so having these units available during this time has been giving us more flexibility and some more built-in safety precautions.
Hey, Craig, listening to a number of comments, and there may be be some confusion as to what these really are. And if the group hasn't really had a field trip out there, and you have a new community development director, if Blaine's amenable to giving you a tour, I think a lot of your questions or concerns can be resolved. And then when you talk about, somebody mentioned safe, just let me go back to the fact when that cannery didn't have camping at that location. 100, 200 people were living out in the trees and in the woods in this community. Ms. Griswold here will testify to that. That wasn't safe. That was very unsafe. And I heard a testimony where there hasn't been any accidents down there. So I guess when we're throwing out, things that catch people's attention, I'd rather have us do a site visit, see what's going on down there, and then formulate some comments or opinions. And I think that would probably all be better served for the next meeting on this subject.
Mm-hmm. And I agree. I mean, everybody's got good points, but I think we have to get reality to match what Clinton needs to comply with in the code. So somewhere there's some middle ground here that we've got to find, and I think we've just got to get some minds together. We got to get OBI and the folks in the room and just figure out what's going to work best, short and long term for our community. But it sounds like for now, the way this is written, we don't have to change that OBI can ask council for an exception to that, and that should help them be economically stable through this season.
Correct.
Okay. So anything else on employee campgrounds? Yes.
This is Brian.
Yeah.
One more quick point, kind of like on the humane and safety side. So, we go through multiple audits for DRC, and I can list about 3 or 4 other ones, and they actually go through and look at our housing areas, including the modular units, to make sure that they meet kind of international regulations that have been set up for ethical and humane housing of people. So when we sell to other countries, they use these ethical audits across the world to make sure that people aren't using incorrect labor or using labor that's not housed correctly. And so we end up passing all of those based upon that. So in terms of the humane and safety portion, obviously there's code, and we have to get a code to meet the local city guidelines for health and safety. But in terms of an overall broad view, we are maintaining with kind of what these overall ethical standards are for our industry.
Okay. Thank you, Brian.
Can I just get a clarification? Brian, who did you say they get audited by? I missed that.
So the big one is the BRC, which is the British Retail Consortium. I'd have to go back and look, because we get usually between 12 and 14 audits during the season for environmental, food safety, and then third-party audits. I know there's at least 2 or 3 other ones, including ADC, which Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation. They come through and they look at our housing units as well. And I'd have to look at some of the third-party audits too that do go through and look through our housing standards as well for our employees.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Carol, did you? Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just wondering what it would take to bring, and what effects would be to bring the 150 days that our code has into the fire chief's code for 180. Is that a simple change to say, instead of 150 days, have it aligned with his code, that it would be 180? And would that have negative connotations on something else globally that we wouldn't want to change? Just a thought to research that.
So I'll answer that in 2 parts. One, this would actually be the best time to do it. It would have to be like now, today, while we're going through code codification. Then it would be a simple change in a 5 to an 8. 150 is only for this employee campground, so it's only in one section of the code. So it wouldn't affect, to my knowledge, it wouldn't affect really anything that's outstanding or in the future. And it would closely align with ours. It would be a beneficial. Actually, Jackie and I had talked about before she left, changing that section. I don't even know, it might have gotten redlined to 180.
I think I have a note.
Yeah,
To that
I think it
effect,
was
but
already.
That would have to be reviewed by community development again.
Yeah, so I think that's in the works, actually. And again, there's no denying that these are much better than tents. Right now, you've got it written as tents or RVs, right? But I'm not gonna inspect a tent or an RV or shanty town or, right? That's, to me, this is, I'm not saying it's the same thing, it's just an addition. So either take away tents and RVs, just leave it blank, or say tents, RVs, and whatever you, dry vans, whatever you wanna call this. And then they still do what they wanna do. OBI, anybody else takes on full responsibility that they're not gonna blow over, that snow's not gonna collapse on them, nobody's gonna die if there's a fire. They take that responsibility because they're called, what, Connex or dry vans. And that's, to me, kind of the really simplest way to get around code. I mean, essentially, I'm not saying I'm happy about it, but
Yeah.
I don't see that being a permanent solution, other than bringing them into that step that was mentioned.
Let's get rid of tents, change them to connexes, and change it to 180 days. So it's
I like it.
consistent.
Yeah.
Could you read that, how it would read?
Sorry, let's see.
I think it's in more than one place. Right?
So the wording that had been proposed by the city manager was, if you look at page 23, number 2, so it would state that camping units as described in 1510-140, which is the definitions, and you'll see in your printed out little handout that I have here, that a camping unit is described as a tent or recreational vehicle. So camping units, a tent or recreational vehicle, are not permitted. For the purposes of this section, a camping unit is described as a temporary single unit providing living facilities for one or more persons. So that part of the definition we would need to adjust, right?
I would say take the temporary off and say I'm sorry, on the spot, having to think
No,
of
you're fine.
non-permitted or non-regulated living unit.
Do you want to call it a providing living facilities for one or more persons?
How about housing?
No, that's how our city now.
I mean, is it
Or
too
just
much
say-
of a pigeonhole to say a camping unit is described as a connex unit providing living facilities for one or more persons? Is that too?
Seems
Too
okay.
narrow?
By taking permanent, non-permanent out, does that mess up the 180 days that we have in the other section?
Well, we would not issue, if you change this,
Okay.
we would not issue a temporary building permit to them ever again. Because you're essentially saying that RV is going to stay there forever.
Yeah.
And we're cool with it. So that Connex is going to stay there forever. OBI is going to ensure, like I said, I recommended an annual attestation, smoke detectors, fire extinguisher, and we leave them alone and they do their job, and maybe you limit how many per acre or I don't know, but it's an option. I don't know that it's the best, but it does kind of have meet a little bit both in the middle, right? Like,
Would any of those like inspections or audits would that be helpful, and then attestation?
I don't know exactly. I would have to see exactly what they're looking for, because I know.
Because they already get those done regularly and have all this paperwork that says that.
Well, the last time I went, I found I had to get the inspection form 812 smoke detectors not working, and stuff like that. So I don't know how regularly they come, or beginning of the season, middle of the season. So they have a safety officer at the plant, so it shouldn't be a problem to walk through the units and say, beep, beep, beep.
Right.
So is that enough for administration to move forward?
I'm not really comfortable with the non-regulated. If we're gonna allow these, wouldn't it be fine to let him do a life safety inspection like he does for other housing units?
But I have to reference a code section when I do that, and it goes back to what do we classify you as? And these are now going to be these are not They don't exist in my world.
I know.
They don't.
This is really interesting.
They're a figment, so, but it's no different than the RV. We allowed RVs there, right?
I know.
And I wouldn't expect an
6
RV.
tarps
Right.
on the top.
But they will be inspected
By the staff,
other,
correct?
other
Right.
agencies.
Right, so that could be included, make sure that happens on an annual basis.
I still kind of like it being having to move them and then city council can shoulder that burden. But, because I would hate to just change this and then allow connexes to be put up wherever without any proper anything.
Well, I think that, you know, I think going to 180 days doesn't sound like much of an issue. I think saying that connexes are okay in employee campground takes care of some of the immediate stuff that the fire chief is dealing with. But for the long term, I think as a community we need to work on a solution to, just like we did with the tents.
Yeah.
You know, the tents were allowed. They didn't have to move away from tents. It was an agreement that, you know, it would be safer, better to move away from tents, and they came up with a solution. They did. So I think it's kind of the same thing with these connexes, is that I think we should do the best we can to meet in the middle, make it where things can work, and then start to improve.
I agree.
So will the title still be employee campgrounds, which implies tents? Or could you change it to seafood workforce, seasonal workforce? Which is only allowed in the industrial zone.
Well, employee campgrounds are only allowed in industrial.
But campgrounds implies tents and RVs and hammocks and stuff.
But it can imply just about anything as long as the definition doesn't say that. So I don't know that having to go back through and change all that is necessary if the definition is clear, unless someone else, unless there's
I
a...
would think you would need to define exactly what this unit is.
Yes.
Because we go back to when I first started speaking about, we denied an actual man camp.
Mhm.
Now we're gonna allow this, right? Which I'm promoting here, but what happens to the denial when, is it gonna come back because it's an employee campground? It is better than the condos? So I would prefer you define that one unit and say only this thing, 3-bedroom, if you wanna call it, unit is allowed.
Mhm.
And some caveat to, with the responsibility, liability lying on the business.
So let's just leave the employee campground, get rid of the tents, RVs, define connex structure, change to 180 days.
Sounds good.
Mhm.
And then council can deal with 180 and moving it.
Expanding it out or.
Yeah, however they see fit. And then that way everybody, well, as much as we can, get compromise.
Should we, since we're at it, should we put something in there about the expectation that connexes will be phased out by 2027?
I don't know if we can do that.
I don't legally,
No,
yeah.
because
How about
we didn't,
2080?
I think,
I say we just.
I say we put it in there and let a lawyer or someone else take it out, rather than not have it in there at all. It is our intention.
What would they be phased out to do what then? Are you saying something more permanent then, or?
Yes. Mhm.
Yeah, lift
So
them
you-
up, put a pad in front of it.
And that may go back to the previous comment that was made, that some of them will not want to do that at all because it is cost prohibitive. Then that's the concern there too.
Well, just saying something to the effect that it's our intent, not necessarily a law or something binding, but it would be an intent to move in that direction.
What if we just put in working towards phasing it some determined future point, and we can work with council and us and try to figure that out?
Yeah, because I hate for that thought to get lost, and I think that would be fine to put something along that, because I just don't want that progression, which a lot of us like, lost.
So maybe
Danielle?
perhaps phasing to more permanent housing at a, future point.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll verify with administration if that is something that is appropriate to put in the city code.
Okay.
And, but for sure, the commission is proposing that we make the adjustments to the definition to exclude tents and RVs as in part of an employee campground, and to specify that it is only a conic structure that is going to be allowed in an employee campground. Is that okay? Do we need to define conics more than using that terminology?
Because what was that, dry container, I
It's a
think?
dry van, it's like,
Dry van,
it's kind of a unit, it's another universe, like we use Connex very fluidly, a lot of the world also uses the word dry van.
is one more
It's just another name for it.
precise, or is it sort of the same thing?
No, it's just the universal, it's like, I would say common speak.
Could also
Okay.
say metal shipping containers.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Courtney?
And Blaine's got something.
Yeah.
You guys talk about phasing these out. Bear in mind, this is my business, this is what I do, you're phasing me out. You're saying you can no longer do business, you can no longer have employees, you know, so. I'm just not sure of legally, you can do that. I mean, this is my business, I build these things and I rent them out, I provide a service, so. It just seems you're a little flippant about phasing out my business.
Well, maybe more in the direction of a permanent.
In a perfect world, if they, you know, at some point, people will decide, well, you know, we want something different. And if mine is no longer the best solution, well, that's the competitive world we live in. But for the city to step in and say, we don't value your business, we want to phase your business out, I'm not sure that's a position the city wants to be in.
Well, I was thinking,
I wasn't necessarily saying phase your business out, was really to move towards something more permanent, which right now your connexes are classified as temporary. If they could be moved to a classification of permanent, that I think that would still meet the same goals.
One of the nice things about these connexes is the land underneath them is not changed. And so it gives the flexibility to companies like OBI to say, well, we no longer, you know, we want to expand out into this area and expand our plant, and, you know, they go here, they can be moved off. Once you start putting foundations under things, you pretty much says this land will always be used to this. And it's, you know, it's just one of the advantages of having them, so they're mobile.
Flexible.
But like you were saying, if they could be called permanent with, what you call it, the helicore?
Yes, but that is, once again, we're butting up against the code.
Well,
And
that's right.
I don't even know if it could be done. I'd have to sit down with the building inspector and say, these things, remember, they're freight containers. They
I
don't,
understand.
they don't have the same engineering as a house. They're engineered to you know, greater stresses for different things, but it doesn't cross over. You're not going to find an engineer that says, yeah, this is a house, this is a freight container, now the freight container is equal to that. I don't even know how you begin that type of testing. I've run into this problem before, and it's really difficult. They're made out of steel, so obviously steel's stronger than wood, but how do you?
I understand. What I was thinking was, you know, to move more towards what would be classified as permanent housing.
Yeah.
So I think that your product could be moved into a permanent housing category over a 5-year period.
I'd have to consult an engineer on that because, and really look at the code things that.
Or maybe
fire
council
chief
will
was
say a
talking about.
10-year period. I'm not sure.
If we want to keep that phasing out section, we definitely would have to say like phasing out non-permanent structures, because
Yeah.
not trying to poke at the connex, just trying to move things to a more
Permanent.
stable,
Yeah.
permanent area.
Just a vague statement within the context, or, yeah.
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 Because we did hear other comments about trying to move, continue to move forward with more permanency. So, and then let's wrap it up after this.
Okay, I'd just like to add 2 comments. Would the definition include, or would the table include by CUP, annual CUP, so this could be reviewed every year? I think that should be part of this employee campground that is by CUP every year, so that you can keep track of what's happening. And the other thing is that you can look into what Christchurch did in New Zealand after their earthquake. They built some pretty extraordinary structures out of shipping containers, and maybe we could get some inspiration on what they did to provide safe housing and stores and pizzerias and banks and everything. They did an extraordinary job down there, so it's pretty inspiring what can be done with connexes, and we could look into that. Even 2 or 3 stories, it's pretty incredible.
Okay. All right, does anybody the commission want to change anything that we've already agreed upon? Okay, I really want to wrap this up.
I know. I'm sorry I missed the first 5 minutes, but I also spent quite a bit of time on Title 15 definitions. And I know you were hitting on just a few of them, the substance abuse treatment centers and that. But this, I believe, is a really important time to make sure our code is the way we want it to be. And I don't really think that Title 15 definitions are under an extreme time constraint, all of it, So I also sent these to you today. I didn't get a chance to do Section 2. This is just Section 1. And I think there's some really important changes that the commission needs to consider. And I'd appreciate if you could look at those before you pass Title 15 definitions.
Just to clarify something, this is the second time you said you sent us something, but I don't show that I got it.
Jason sent them out for me.
Yeah, Jason did forward those 2.
Friday, you should.
Okay, I was looking for them from you. I didn't look for
Well,
them.
I was told it was best to send them to administration, so I don't get spammed out, mysteriously. So,
Okay.
if that doesn't work, I need to
Checking.
know, because I spent a lot of time on this, and I hope that you could consider what I did.
Dates.
Maybe we can resend them just to make sure.
Yeah, there's one on Friday, and then one was yesterday?
On Monday?
Monday, yeah.
Was it sent from you?
Mhm.
I don't think I received
I
any.
sent it to that planning email.
No, we'll figure it out.
See.
Yeah, well, resend it.
Uh-oh.
We'll
Resend
get it to you, yeah.
Did it go to our
Yeah.
city emails? Is that maybe?
Whatever was on the
It's a distribution list, so
Distribution
we'll have to check and
Okay.
see
Okay.
who's,
Okay,
Yeah, 'cause
thank
I
you.
don't
make
think I
sure
got it,
that
but
all
let's
your
check.
addresses are included on that
All right,
list.
thank you. Okay. Next topic.
So,
Oh, we wanted this, is that the CUP requirement?
right, so I provided in the,
Oh, no, I
Um,
think one of
so-
them is his, right?
so in response to the questions from previous 2 meetings about what can the commission legally require in a CUP, in the packet on page 35, we've provided some input from the city attorney. Basically, I'm not gonna read the whole thing. You can look through it on your own time. But basically, the Planning and Zoning Commission can require a condition that is necessary to fulfill the above-mentioned conditions, which are on page 33. You'll see from City Code the review criteria for a CUP, which is the use is consistent with the purpose of this chapter and the purposes of the zoning district. The value of the adjoining property will not be significantly impaired. The purposes and the proposed use is in harmony with the comprehensive plan. public services and facilities are adequate to serve the proposed use. The proposed use will not be harmful to the public safety, health, or welfare. So then number 6, any and all specific conditions deemed necessary by the commission to fulfill the above-mentioned conditions shall be met by the applicant. These may include but are not limited to measures relative to access, screening, site development, building design, operation of the use, and other similar aspects related to the proposed use. So the conditions, it's unfortunately not very specific and clear for you guys, but you can require anything on a CUP that you feel is necessary to meet those requirements that are stipulated. But as stated on page 35, it needs to be supported by substantial evidence to be upheld in court. And obviously, if any requirements that you make are felt to not be supported by substantial evidence, then there is the appeal period that the applicant can appeal to have any sort of requirements taken off or reviewed by a legal court. So, any questions or?
I think that's a fairly good guideline on there, because then you just don't put in arbitrary things that the commission or an individual within the commission just may think, that it might be a neat thing on the property or not to have on the property. So it's, if it doesn't meet that criteria, I think that's sort of like keeps you in the lane.
Right.
Yeah.
So and I was just going to bring up a point, as we review in the future different CUPs, there is a part in the agenda statement and resolution where staff provides their feedback of what we would recommend as requirements for the CUP, and those recommendations come from not only community development reviewing the application, but we send out a staff review to all of the departments within the city, and they send back their input, and then that goes into it. But I would recommend in future P&Z meetings, when we are reviewing CUPs, that you really look through those recommendations and requirements and put in your own input, go through each one, make sure that you agree with it and that it is meeting the requirements of the CUP that's stated in code.
Anything else to add on that?
No, and that's just general guidance. If you want to have a discussion, any further discussion about requirements that should be recommended for the upcoming CUPs on employee campgrounds, this would be a good time to discuss that. I do have the input that I received from our fire chief, but provide additional input being here. So I don't know if that's something we want to discuss further. We've discussed in length employee campgrounds, but not necessarily in regards to what the commission will require on the CUP.
I don't remember exactly what the CUP said last time. Should we just wait until we have it in front of us at our December meeting, or?
Well, we can. Yeah, do you want me to just tell you the requirements that have been recommended?
Sure. Okay.
And discuss it? Okay. So these are the recommended requirements for an employee campground. That each sleeping area has a working smoke detector that is less than 10 years old. Fire extinguishers are professionally inspected and tagged annually and are easily accessible and labeled and within 75 feet of all occupants. No electrical hazards exist, to include open junction boxes, extension cords used for permanent wiring, multi-use plug adapters. Each mod has an identification numbering system or an address for emergency response. Exits and exit doors are free of obstruction and doors swing freely. And then an Alaskan engineer has signed off on the method used to secure the units to the ground. So that's what these are the recommendations that you're gonna see on the CUP. If there's additional ones that you feel would be necessary to meet the requirements in code, which are those 6 items that I listed, you know, that the proposed use will not be harmful to public safety, health, and welfare. Now would be a good time to discuss those additions.
Chief, did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I had kind of sent that to her really quick because I knew this was coming up today, but just as Ms. Griswold had mentioned, early on in the OBI when we did come to a conclusion of the 10-foot setbacks to give some kind of fire protection, so I would recommend the 10-foot setbacks as well. That would be the only other one that I had dropped off.
And that's between each unit?
Blaine?
The way these are configured is they're back to back. So there's 2 units, then there's a 12-foot space, 2 units, 12-foot space. But the 2 units have to touch each other. And so at that point you have, you know, as far as fire goes, you have 2 layers of fire-treated plywood, 2 layers of 3/16 steel between each unit. But it's 2 space, 2 space, 2 space. Actually, I can provide an aerial photograph of that for you.
It's in the back here. The aerial was in the back.
Was it? Okay. So when you say 10-foot, I assume you mean per 2?
Yes, how they are at OBI, yes.
Yeah, okay.
As long as that, yes, make sure that's clear, so.
Yeah, so
So
2
I don't-
units back to back, but then 10 feet.
As long as they
At least
maintain
10
the fire.
feet, and then-
Yeah, as long as
Yeah.
they continue maintaining the fire rating.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else on the CUP requirement topic? Okay.
I don't think so.
We're doing great, guys. Item 3, are we ready for item 3?
Yeah.
Okay. Administration, did you want to brief us on that, or should we? We have plenty of information on it to start with.
Yeah, so this is the light manufacturing. I just wanted to point out, I'm just gonna scroll down there, sorry, that the initial directive from City Council was, sorry, page 37, to direct Planning and Zoning Commission to amend the current land use table to allow for light manufacturing in the central business district. So that was the original directive. There have been multiple discussions that have led in other directions, but that's what we should be focusing on, is that directive. And then I provided in the packet a couple examples from other communities as requested. So City of Kenai, page 43, City of Anchorage, page 51, and the City of Soldotna, page 56. Those examples show how they define light or manufacturing. Sometimes they don't define light versus heavy, but just how they define manufacturing in their code and where it is allowed, which zones they allow manufacturing in their code, just so that you can have some examples of what other cities are doing.
Thank you. Commissioners, any comments?
I don't want to separate light and heavy. I kind of like the definitions that we have. I don't know if I'm horribly opposed to light manufacturing in CP. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of it on I wouldn't say a lot, it seems like there's some already. Although, it'd be nice to make sure that it fits with the area that it's in. I don't know exactly how we would do that, but, you know, I'd hate for it to go between two businesses that it's actually gonna cause harm to businesses on either side. But I don't know if we can actually, that's something we can actually do.
I would concur about the, our definitions on this, because I think they go into a lot more detail on some of those things from the other areas that we don't necessarily do. But I guess my question is, you know, what we have in our downtown business right now, because I think that's what we're looking at, or the central business area, are we doing all of those kind of things that are in the definition of light manufacturing? Or, you know, could something else be brought in that would meet that criteria that we would be concerned about? Fabrication, I'm not sure what that would be. Is that, you know, when they were talking about the fabrication, what we, you know, is that welding stuff? Is that some sort of a welding kind of thing downtown? That would be sort of a little bit concerning. But, you know, for what I can see is, you know, we, obviously people do, we're making beer downtown, we're making, you know, they're making candy and taffy and a variety of other things, and I think that's fine. I just, yeah, I don't think there's any extreme stuff that's going on down there, but, you know, would this open the door for too much stuff that would go downtown that could potentially be a hazardous or a potential problem down there?
Chief, is there some, oh, sorry. Is there some fire code definitions between light and heavy?
No, sir. You would just fall in factory 1 or factory 2.
Oh, okay.
So whatever process, candy making or brewery, it just fit under factory, and then the fire codes would address.
So it has to do with something with explosive stuff, potentially, things that potentially could blow up or otherwise. These other things aren't.
If it's like oxidizers and
Yeah.
that's a high hazard group, that's another section, high hazard group.
Okay. And that's probably
Whatever's
why
allowed, our code would address
Mhm.
the safety requirements for it, so kind of
Okay.
out on the light, heavy manufacturing.
Yeah, you wouldn't be involved, yeah, you're just, I understand. Yeah.
Because even some of the light manufacturing could involve large quantities of propane, which properly contained is not an
Would be
issue.
a high hazard for us.
Oh, go ahead. What's that?
That would be a high hazard for us.
Oh, it would
It's a
be,
little
okay.
different, But you can have, like a brewery, up to 16% alcohol. There's nothing in here to say the volume. So, I mean, we can have another Midnight Sun Brewery downtown that's producing hundreds and hundreds of gallons a day. Again, our fire code's going to address that. So I think that's how you want to address manufacturing.
I kind of want to go with what was brought up earlier, was I'd hate to see, and I don't know that we can do it, I'd hate to see that we would allow some form of manufacturing in the middle of our commercial or downtown business district that would devalue or deter people from going to one of the other businesses in town because of an odor, a sound, a threatening potential. That's my only thing is I just don't want to, I'm not sure how to make this happen without protecting, I'd like to be able to protect the businesses that are there and not be able to bring something in that could damage the other businesses. Is that
One of the definitions, I'm trying to find it, but one of the definitions you gave us mentioned about odor or sound. Do you remember? I think I underlined it, I can find it here, but I think it was maybe Anchorages or Kenai's. But light manufacturing did have a sentence about, I can find it here, but it did have a sentence that said that it couldn't,
Noxious.
yeah, it couldn't have too much sound or odor that would detract from the area around it, which that would be, so let's see, here it is.
See, that's part of the thing where they said the fabrication that I was looking at from terms of sound and potential dangerous fabrication, you know, sheet metal fabricating, the rest, I would think that'd be problematic in downtown area.
See, oh, this is manufacturing light, so I guess it's, yeah, manufacturing light has, on page number 5, on page 52.
52.
Yeah. General manufacturing establishment that you can has little or no potential for creating noise, vibration, dust, smoke, fumes, odor.
Yeah, noxious.
Yeah. Environmental impact, glares.
Well, that makes sense, because, you know, what is it downtown for us is mostly, you know, it's, you know, tourist restaurants, you know, like, you know, basically, you know, just a, administrative kind of thing. It's not an industrial kind of building or, putting in anything that's gonna potentially be, you know, hazardous or loud or anything else like this. It seems like something like that in the downtown area could be would be, you know, would seriously distract from what our downtown business actually does right now. It's just shops primarily.
But with a sentence just like that, you know, you could allow light manufacturing as long as it complied with not creating
Right.
Noise, vibration, dust, and smoke. So that would make sure that your fabrication wasn't, say, something that was going to detract from the businesses around you, but it was, you know, something that's not going to bother anyone.
Well, things like jewelry making or, you know,
Tech.
yeah, that kind of stuff. And I don't know if that falls under fabrication. I'm not quite sure what that falls under. But what is the objective? I'm sorry, what was the purpose of moving this into manufacturing light to the downtown business district? Is there a, you know, what is the impetus for us to do that, consider that, because it hasn't been there?
Well, it is, I think part of the comments that Liz had made is that it isn't allowed in the land use table currently, but there are businesses manufacturing, and then there are new businesses that want to manufacture certain items, and they cannot because it's not even allowed by conditional use permit in the code.
So are the things like you're saying is like the taffy, the beer, and the rest of that falls under manufacturing, light manufacturing?
Yeah.
It does.
I mean, I would imagine. I don't know what other definition there would
Yeah, I don't know. That's, yeah.
would be. Yeah.
That's what I was just asking.
But I would agree. Our current definition code for light manufacturing seems to allow more noxious type of manufacturing than what this definition is that Commissioner Charbonneau has brought up on page 52. So
Whose is that? I guess I can scroll through and
I
find
think
out.
it's Anchorage.
Is that Anchorage?
yeah, it is Anchorage.
Okay. Yeah, if we could tighten up that definition on light, then that would allow the businesses that are there already existing to comply with what they're doing and let the potential for new businesses come in while maintaining that the surrounding area doesn't get a detraction from some sort of business that could harm the other area businesses.
Yeah, it defines what is actually allowed and just protects the neighborhood, and even though still allowing the light manufacturing.
I like the intent of the language. My concern would be, how would you guys enforce it? I mean, somebody wants to bring in a new business and put it in central business district. How are you going to be able to determine if it smells bad or if it's going to be too noisy?
Well, if you put it in the land use table, it would be as a conditional use permit. So they would, any business that is proposing to do light manufacturing would have to apply with a conditional use permit, and it would be seen before the commission. And then the commission could determine then if it met the definition.
Yeah, and then Skip's got a question too, but we'll finish up here.
Don't we currently have things in the code that have to do with decibel regulation anyway when it comes to like generators and festivals? And I think we've had to apply when we do like the 4th of July, we have to make sure that everyone's generator falls below a certain decibel thing, and so I think that might be a way to like ensure, like put that in code of decibel I mean, you can measure decibels pretty easily. They just have a sound meter up there, and like if something's going on, it either does or it doesn't. I'm sure there's probably ways that you can detect particles per million for scent as well, or something, so, I don't know.
I think also too, depending upon the agency or what somebody plans on doing, there's state agencies that actually can come down and review things as well. They have to operate within a certain amount of parameters to be, to conduct their business as well. So that might be, so it doesn't fall completely on the city to be the enforcement arm or the, checking on people. There are other agencies as well for that too. I mean, because I understand that there's things where people want to do marijuana extraction and things like this. There's a huge amount of regulation and things that they have to adhere to in order to even be able to open their doors. So, they'd have to do that first, so it wouldn't fall on, the planning department or something like that.
Skip, you have?
Yeah, a couple questions. So, if I'm understanding this, there was a gentleman, I think, in your last meeting that came to speak on this particular subject matter. So, are you looking to get a directive, I quite couldn't hear a directive from council, but am I understanding that you're only speaking to one particular business owner in town to bless this too, or are you looking at the blanket, all CBD now is going to be light manufacturing? What say you? All CBD is going to light manufacturing?
So
Somebody.
the directive from City Council was for the plan and zoning to review the land use table to see if we can put in light manufacturing in the central business district. That was it.
In the district, or you're changing all CBD to light manufacturing?
No, so it would, in the land use table currently, under light manufacturing is only allowed in auto commercial and industrial. And in auto commercial, you're required to have a conditional use permit. In industrial, it's allowed outright. So right now, anybody who wants to do light manufacturing in the central business district is not allowed.
Right.
But obviously there's breweries, candy making, there's light manufacturing. So that's why the directive came from City Council for planning and zoning to review putting a conditional use permit option in the central business district for light manufacturing. So wouldn't the changes, if these changes were made, wouldn't allow light manufacturing to happen outright in central business, but it would allow business owners to apply for a conditional use permit that then would be reviewed by the commission to see if they met the light manufacturing standards.
So this body would have to bless a CUP for a CBD property owner to do light manufacturing.
Correct.
Because I do have, oddly enough, there's two residents behind me that got pulled into CBD years ago. I know how it happened, who the culprits were, but it's very odd. And so I've got two CBD parcels on 3rd Avenue behind me, and I'm sure would like to see it remain quiet. I'll leave it at that. So. And I guess the other question I have, Craig, is this a process that to really get the benefit of all the central business district owners, is this something that you have a process that you follow? Would you be contacting all the CBD businesses and soliciting for their input if they want this to be allowed in that district? How do you go about your process? Can you help me understand?
So it is on the planning and zoning agenda to review the entire land use table, and the process is to address specific districts and bring in people, at least invite people who live in those districts to come into specific work sessions for those districts. However, with this being a specific directive from City Council, we're looking at it just as the directive that it is versus the whole land use table.
In the last 5 years, how many times have we gotten a directive like this from City Council on some specific matter like this? Do you recall? It seems like it's a little unique.
It is unique. I'm thinking maybe once.
Okay.
And with this, if say for example, we decide that the light manufacturing doesn't go there, do we grandfather the people that are already there? because they're doing it, is that,
Right, so you're saying if we don't change the land use table, they would be non-conforming businesses, basically.
right?
And, yeah, with other non-conforming issues of code, they would fall in that category where we wouldn't be able to shut them down or change what they're currently doing. But moving forward, any new businesses, any new changes to those businesses that are currently operating would have to meet code.
Okay.
But the current ones that are operating would just be considered non-conforming and would continue as they are.
And this is just a historical question, sorry, Chair, I just
No.
started going through the,
It
is,
works out.
how did these folks, get authorization to do that if it never was part of, if light manufacturing was never part of the downtown stuff? Do you have any history?
I don't have
Huh?
history on that.
Yeah,
Sorry.
okay. Good to know,
You
we're
might
not the
have some-
only.
You might have
Skip
some
notes.
history.
We're actually a friendly town. We're not known for enforcement in this town.
Okay.
Did you get that memo?
Yeah, sorry, it didn't come up on my computer.
We don't have anybody to enforce. I mean, if we did, we'd have hired a former Hell's Angel to be our community development. But seriously, we don't do enforcement.
Okay,
That doesn't seem to be our forte in this town now. So if we're gonna change that,
It's always been a problem.
give them about a 2 or 3 year head start.
okay, we're consistently inconsistent, all right, I'm good.
Well,
Oh, go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
No, Carol had her hand
Oh,
up.
yeah,
but-
Carol.
Okay, well, I was just curious when this first came up, the very first time, was like manufacturing, and I had no idea that it was really about marijuana, something or other,
It's
marijuana
in
extraction.
Yes.
And I don't know much about that process. Could anyone explain what they want to do and how it would impact the neighbors? And, you know, is there a lot of smell that comes out from that, a lot of odors? Is there a lot of energy use? Just, you know, what does that mean, marijuana
So
extraction?
that's really not something we're gonna go into tonight. It's not on our agenda.
But
Really, what
that's
was
a
on our
light
agenda
manu-
was the
isn't
light
that a
manufacturing.
manufacturing use?
I don't know
Oh, we
because
talked about it being.
if we,
rolling a joint in my day.
if we, here we go. No, really, I don't know, it would be up to the interpretation that we would come up with a definition of light manufacturing, which we have like a prototype for that we've defined as Anchorage 1. So I don't know if the issue of the marijuana extraction would meet light manufacturing or not. But for right now, light manufacturing, the definition we've identified is what we'd like to recommend moving forward with.
So I'm opposed to allowing light manufacturing in CBD. I think we should reserve that for central business district uses and then grandfather in the light manufacturing uses that are there now. But I think we really need a place for central business, and we've already kind of infringed upon it by allowing single-family housing instead of businesses. And pretty soon, you know, where's our central business district? So I'm opposed to expanding light manufacturing into our downtown businesses.
And my question is manufacturing now only authorized in industrial, right? Is that correct?
So the light manufacturing is allowed by conditional use permit in auto commercial
Auto commercial.
and allowed outright in industrial. And that's light manufacturing. The heavy manufacturing is only allowed by conditional use permit in industrial. So heavy manufacturing is not allowed outright in any district.
Other than,
Well, I'm not really on board with bringing it in, but I feel like we need to tighten up our light manufacturing terminology to include that sentence, roughly something along the lines of that sentence, talking about noxious odors, vibrations, fumes, whatnot, dust, because we're a little vague on ours. And the CUP would definitely be the way to go with this, but I don't feel like there's plenty of places for light manufacturing right now.
You feel there is, or
There's,
there?
yeah, there's plenty of other places.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
But, you know, in the tourism side of things, having a place where you know, make your own jewelry or make your own candy or your own beer, I don't see that as a deterrent to the other businesses in the downtown area. So, you know, grandfathering in what's already there, but not allowing anyone else, I'm a little concerned about that. But I think just having light manufacturing with the CUP would be a fair way to go for.
And that would include the additional requirements that he's, you know, in the CUP about not noxious and not loud or anything else like that.
Well, that would be in the definition, and
Definition,
in
yeah,
the
add that to
definition,
definition,
the
okay.
CUP would have to support the definition, yeah.
And I think that's a good idea because some of these, to me, are a bit broad in the you know, in the definition itself and what constitutes fabrication, because that could be a very wide interpretation.
Yeah, if we keep that and then add to it where you also have to make sure that you don't create these additional problems, then I feel like that makes the definition pretty good.
And I think wasn't there something in there about interfering with the other properties or notice, or?
I believe there was further down, I think.
Yeah, and that's what I want to make sure of that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
Yeah. Okay.
can't be harming the businesses around us.
Right. Did you, Skip, did you have your hand up again, or, okay, Carol?
Was there something in that definition about limiting the dangerous chemicals? Like when you see those hazard triangles, you don't want to exceed, you know, a certain number of levels. Is there something in there that would prohibit?
Like hazmat?
Yeah, would prohibit dangerous, you know, chemicals stored on site and all that, or use of hazardous chemicals.
One of the differences between light and heavy manufacturing is heavy deals with flammable liquids and gases. So does just not having that in the light manufacturing term kind of cover that? Skip.
Were you asking that question, or?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Carol, you should, but it seems like it's outlined that one deals with them and one doesn't already.
Yeah, I like that first sentence in the light manufacturing one. It covers a lot. Skip?
Yeah, so, I'm trying to understand here. So, we know, we talked a couple minutes earlier, we don't do enforcement, but we're gonna open up the barn door a little bit more here. And we're gonna go on the wink wink, everybody's gonna comply. And I'm looking at, you know, the downtown business sector has got housing, you've got residences upstairs, so some of these businesses, you've got hotels behind other businesses. And will these folks all in town have an opportunity to voice their comments and opinion about whether you're gonna move forward with light manufacturing? Or just think the door is gonna get kicked open because we didn't enforce not a few that were down there already. So now instead of grandfathering them in or whatever you want to think about, that's justification to open up the door and a little bit more. So just trying to understand where we're going, because my grandkids may be here someday and they're going to go, hey, granddad, what the heck were you thinking about? Why'd you do this to us? You know? So just kind of trying to understand over time how this thing could morph into something else. So, as they go to light, and then somebody says, well, maybe let's go to heavy, you know. So,
Sure.
yeah, just interested.
And yeah, things can certainly morph, and we do try and think about that. And that's why we would have the CUP. But the CUPs are announced. Is there, there's public hearings on the CUPs?
Right.
Yeah. So the public hearing process for the CUP would give the other businesses in the area, and they would get notified, plus it would be public notification of of a business coming in that would need the CUP. So there is an opportunity to be heard.
And I understand that, but before you even adopted that, because you're really adopting another policy. And, we talk transparency, we talk about communication. Would this be a process that you would include anybody who's now got a CBD property designation, whether they want to see the CUP rolled out? Or is this something that you're just going to do at this level here? So are you going to basically make a recommendation to do this and then council approves it? So I'm just trying to understand the process. Or does this go out to a community process where if you're changing zoning somewhere, I thought you have some guidelines that people within a certain radius of that zoning change, they get notified, and there's a public comment period. So does this not need to fall in that realm, or how does that work out?
I will defer to administration for
Well,
that.
It's just a work session, so
Right.
we're talking about bringing this, having the administration write it up, and then bring it back to vote on, and when it comes back to vote on, then everybody would be, given notice so that they can come and say their 2 cents about it, and then,
And then it goes to council.
Then it goes to council.
I'm not going to be here for your next meeting, so I'm trying to push up.
So my question is, do we send out changes to the definitions, the rest to the affected areas, or is it just the CUP to send out to everybody?
In code, it's just the CUP is requires that you send out to the people in the 300-foot radius.
Yeah,
For just a general code change,
yeah.
the code does not require us to send that code change to everyone that lives within a central
Affected
business
that area.
district. It would just be, they would need to be aware of the public notices going out in the newspaper and email and come to the meeting.
I'd like to leave CBD alone and change the definition, but that's just me.
Change the definition, but not
Not
allow it
incorporated.
with CUP and,
Let's just change the definition, because I think it needs to be tightened up on its own,
Mhm.
and then just leave CBD alone.
And not have it in light manufacturing downtown and grandfather the
Yeah.
other ones that might be in that.
well, they're already grandfathered in
They're
by
already
our
grandfathered in
process.
there. Yeah.
So you're going to then change the CBD definition to include beer processing, chocolates, and sewing?
No, just
No.
gonna change it to make it so has little or no potential of creating noise, vibration, dust, smoke, something along those lines.
So what the current process, my understanding is that basically the brewery downtown, if it were to change hands, it could not be a brewery again. If they're not allowed to do light manufacturing and a brewery is considered light manufacturing, if they go to sell that property, it cannot be a brewery. The same with the chocolates and the same with any jewelry making. If they sell that business, then they cannot be a light manufacturing business because it's not zoned and there would not be a CUP option.
I was under the impression that if they're grandfathered in, they stay that way until they do a big change to it, like a home, but I don't.
No, if they sell it or change use.
Yeah, I would have to verify, but I believe, if it changes ownership, then, they would have to apply for the CUP, but if a CUP isn't an option, then it would limit.
Just decide whether to,
I don't know, I think having the light manufacturing wouldn't be such a bad idea, but with the added information that you wanted to put in there, that sort of does tighten it up quite a bit, and that would limit it quite, much more so. It gives, legitimacy to the businesses that are down there, and hope if somebody wants to sell it to somebody else, to be a brewery or candle making or candy making business, they have the same option, because I don't want to limit the business owners either, saying, well, they're going to have to own this in perpetuity because they'll never be able to sell, because the only thing, it's been built to be a brewery and it can't be sold for something else. It sort of hurts the businessmen in the downtown area too.
Mhm.
non-conforming is an issue. because I'm not in favor of the light manufacturing being there, but it's already there. So I don't know what to do about it. I think that we should just decide whether we want the administration to bring it forward at our next meeting or not, with a CUP and with the changes.
I would like to see it brought forward at our next meeting with the CUP and with the changes. So I really like the definition. I think it's a good, strong definition that still protects the businesses that are downtown. And it sounds enforceable. So I feel good about that and bringing it forward to see what the full commission would think.
Gary,
What?
what do you think? You want to bring it forward with the CUP and the changes for next meeting?
You know what I've been thinking?
Yes.
Didn't this all start in 2018? All this definitions? And every time we get something that looks like it's going to be finalized and put in order, someone comes up with different definitions, and now we've got definitions on definitions. And and all we're doing right now is changing everything that was there. We're going to keep doing this to forever. I think we ought to just stop and pass what we've got and be happy with it.
Well, I think that's one piece that we're working on is the list of definitions. This one was about, we had a definition on light manufacturing. We wanted to strengthen it and allow light manufacturing legitimately in Central Business District with the conditional use permit. That's what we're trying to figure out if we want to bring that up at our regular council or commissioner meeting.
And if we don't bring it up at the next meeting, then what do we do with it?
Council will probably bring it back up to us again.
They'll send it back to us.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Personally, I think that given the fact that we have people who are doing the light manufacturing down there, I think that we should be able to allow it to go into the central business district. But however, with the tightening of the no noxious fumes, no loud noises, the variety of things that we're taking from the Anchorage one, or we can tone it up and just tighten up the definition, and it might allow, it'll be a win-win in my opinion. The people that are down there have got the authorization. It allows businesses to do things there with, again, it would be a CUP, and then, then we have further guidance and we have a better definition of what light manufacturing would be.
That sounds good.
Yes, Carol.
That does sound good. If you don't know that it's happening, or you're not impacted negatively because it's happening, it seems that would work out.
Please.
Gary, this is for you. I sat on P&Z for 8 years, and along with my cohort over here, and we dealt a lot with the definitions.
Yeah.
Now it's 20 years ago.
It still hasn't gone away.
And it's always a refinement, because there's a lot of things that you just can't think of. And all of a sudden the situation changes, well, then the definition has to change.
Thanks for that clarification. Okay. We're at our limit, our time limit?
We are.
No? Oh, I thought we were just till 8 o'clock.
That's self-imposed if it is, if you have a limit at 8 o'clock.
It used to go till 9.
Okay then. What's that?
The actual meeting, if we had an actual meeting by the guidance in the manual, it says we can actually go at 10:30. Not that I'm advocating, but
Yeah, really.
we can do that.
Well, we do have one more thing on our agenda, but why don't we take a 5-minute break?
Okay.
Let's clarify what we do with this first real quick. So
Oh, I thought we did.
Okay. So we're changing the definition and making it with a CUP and bringing it back for next meeting.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I will bring you a resolution for your review and approval or denial that will it will be a resolution recommending an ordinance to City Council of changing the definition of light manufacturing and adding a conditional use permit option for the central business district in the land use table.
Wow. You got all that out of this? That's
Yeah.
pretty good, Courtney.
Greg, what's the final topic you want to discuss?
It is height requirements in city code.
Oh, building, yeah, building heights.
Are you leaving?
Thanks, yeah.
Thank you for your comment.
Yeah, you bet. You guys can handle that height restriction thing.
Yeah.
You got the chief here, so.
Need a bigger
Hey.
truck.
5 minutes? Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Come on, old man.
And maybe
Okay,
that's
we're
a
ready.
qualifier, you know, so.
All right, thanks for coming back after the break. And now we'll go on to our last agenda item, discuss changes, height requirements in city code, page 62.
What page?
62.
Oh my, you only got 66 pages, so
Don't jinx us.
I think it would take long, right?
Don't jinx us. Okay, Courtney, did you want to set us up?
Yeah, so this request came from, if you remember from previous meetings, there was the cruise ship terminal height variance that ended up being pulled, and then also the Protzman height variance. So it was requested by the commission that we look at whether certain districts have a different height requirement than the 34 feet. And so the definition, or the development requirements here under building height says that the purpose of building height standards is to prevent loss of life or excessive property damage through the inability of the city fire department to reach upper stories or roofs, and to help maintain the character of neighborhoods. So as our fire chief can state, the initial, that first sentence, or that first part of the sentence isn't so much of a consideration right now, not because of the ladder truck, but because of fire code for buildings. So that the building height isn't going to create a situation where loss of life or excessive property is going to occur if there's a taller building, because our fire code will address that. So it's really up to the commission to look at the different zones and decide if a higher height limit would maintain the character of the neighborhood or infringe upon the character of those zones.
Okay, thank you, Courtney. Commissioners?
I personally, I'd like to just keep it how it is and not do anything about it. I don't want to see it get raised. We have a nice view shed now, or view plane, depending on where you're from. And I've been stopped on the street all week, people all upset about this. For the height we have now is high enough. It's not to the peak, it's to the mid-roof. You know, we have large buildings. We don't see any reason to go higher. However, if people did want to go higher, we can put in place like a view shed or a view plane. Other cities use them. They're based on an angle. So it's, we have a gradient to our city, and you would create an angle based on that and essentially make it like pretend it's a plane of glass. And so so say start on 4th Street and you have our normal height, you put it on a certain angle. As you move away from 4th Street, buildings can progressively get higher. So if somebody wanted to look into that, if administration wanted to check out something like that, that would allow taller buildings up against the mountains or in areas that aren't going to impact views. I think it's the only way to go about raising it, is you implement some sort of view plane where it's a angular gradient where buildings can, as you move back, they get higher. But myself, I just want to not do anything and get rid of it right now. But it's me.
Is what you're saying, if you're, if I can.
Yeah, no, we're open.
Okay. What you're saying, is that similar to what the Best Western Hotel is, what you're doing? Because the Best Western is too high at the south end. I think that's what it is. And then and then it winds up averages out at the upper end because it's much shorter. So it actually comes across as being very level. And I think they took the average in the middle of the building to determine that to be the 34 feet limit. But technically at the south side, it's too tall. Is that what you're referring to, sort of?
No, this is different.
Okay.
This is where a city implements an area, a specific area. It wouldn't be like over the entire city. You would take like an area of the city where the view is important in that area. And as the topography changes and moves away, you could get higher and higher because you're not blocking the views of everybody else.
Oh, you're saying like up close to the mountains?
Yeah.
Like First Avenue, you could possibly say maybe on First Avenue.
Yeah, you put a 60-story building on First Avenue, right?
Yeah, it's a progression, an angular progression that's basically like an imaginary line as you move
On the
away
west side
from
of First Avenue.
I think that's, if we're gonna entertain it, we need far more work sessions and information on implementing a view plane. But myself, I just don't want to talk about it and leave it how it is. So that's my input.
Well, it sounds interesting. I never heard of such a thing.
I'm not in favor of increasing the height, mostly because of the view plane for the community, and I mean that's one of the attractions to Seward for people to live here, and the way we've been fighting about housing and trying to make decent housing, and you know, if you want to live in Seward, that's great. If you know, living in Seward and having a view, it makes it even better. But cutting into the people's view is, I think it's a quality of life thing for Seward. And, we should avoid it as much as we can.
I agree. I agree to a certain extent, because when you're talking about, because you wind up paying for that view shed, and you talked about affordable housing and rest like this, trying to get homes in here for people, and sometimes not everything can be just 1 or 2 stories. Not that I want to have a high rise or anything else like this, but I think I would like to have something that can allow some flexibility, whether it's closer to the mountains or something along those lines, however you want to do it. But as long as the fire department is able to reach to deal with the fire, or if something happens, or the code things when they're, if the fire department can't reach it, and there's commercial codes that allows, for sprinklers or something that will allow the building be adequately, protected from that standpoint. I just think, giving all around town, trying to, see the homes that are being built and everything else like this, it's wonderful. However, if the town is going to grow to some extent, we have to have some sort of ability to expand in certain areas, and we're so boxed in, we almost actually have to go up in some cases.
I think you should expand on some land that hasn't been zoned yet.
That would be nice too. We're getting there.
Well, but we do have there is some open land too that's right up against Mount Marathon. Up by Doorway, and right at the base of Doorway there's property there for sale, or not for sale, but not developed. So maybe there's some options there to go with some height, instead of just ruling it out completely.
There's views all the way around. Every single house has a view of something out the window, some window, and that charm, the quaint charmness of our town being small. I think, when I looked at this and kind of looked at other cities and what they did, the idea is great, but even a big building's still gonna, my views look out up on the Marathon. I don't want a big building right there up against the mountain, even though it's not gonna block the water view. It's still, my town looks good this way. Anywhere you can look around and see.
And then when we have to do this stuff along the lane, so we're going to limit them, because all those big houses that they put up there now blocks everybody's view shed of the water.
Well, we have 34 feet. It's pretty big already. Look at the buildings we have. They're decent-sized buildings.
They are
already.
pretty big. Yeah. So to your point, though, it's like, how low do you want to go to be able to ensure that you get the view?
I just want to leave it how it is.
Okay.
I don't want to. Just want to leave it how it is. We get decent-sized buildings already. People will get to see things.
Carol?
I think that view plane idea is really interesting, but I also want to point out that it's not only just the view, but somebody puts in a tall structure next to you and blocks your valuable south-facing sunshine. In the wintertime, you want to kill them, for taking away your sunshine. Pioneer Light. And there was a big uproar when the Breeze Inn went up,
Yep.
you know, because we lost our view. And then Hotel 360, we lost another big section. Sea Life Center, we lost another view. You know, we've already lost a lot of view, and I hate to lose any more. I think 34 feet is plenty high enough. I also think that no matter how many things we try to do, we can't possibly cram the world into Seward. And I want to stay small, and I want to stay charming and quaint and beautiful and livable, and not try to just keep cramming more people in here. So I'd like to keep it the way it is.
And then what about the cruise ship terminal request? Aren't they wanting to go 2 feet higher?
4 feet, I believe.
4 feet?
I'm pretty sure they measured wrong, and they were only just a little bit over. I think they measured the very peak, and they're supposed to measure just a little bit down.
They may have, I'm not sure, I just know that they pulled their application, so they may be adjusting it
maybe that's
anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, I think it was only like less than a foot, but because Tom was talking about it, and I looked back and the diagram had it all the way to the top.
Oh, okay, yeah, he did say something about
Yeah.
that.
Plus they pulled it, so.
Yeah.
Well, in Anchorage in the 70s, if you had a gable roof, then the height would be half of the gable. So
That might be
if
right.
it's 34 feet, it'd be that, and that would be, what, 3 or 4 feet higher.
Mhm.
So I built a fourplex that took advantage of that. So I got 4 stories.
Yeah, and that's kind of how our rules worked out.
Yeah, I think so
Yeah,
too.
so-
Yeah, that might be what was going on there.
Mhm.
Okay.
34 is plenty.
I think most people would probably consider that in town too, I would assume, because most people come to a small town here for small town things, and
Mhm.
that's it. But we will probably continue to have more people coming in asking for higher things, whether it is the railroad or Mr. Protzman with his, maybe there may be some other developer wanting to do something along those lines. You know, I don't know. I mean,
You come and move to Seward for Seward. If you want to live amongst tall buildings, you go somewhere else.
Well, and, I mean, we do have the variance application variance to city code that anyone can apply for a variance to this height restriction. I would just recommend if the commission is not going to change the height restriction and leave it as it is, that if there are future variance applications for height restrictions, that they get reviewed and either approved or denied and not pushed back, since the commission is making the decision now to not make any adjustments. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so essentially just keep it how it is.
Right.
Yep.
But there can be variances granted.
Right.
We just
Yeah.
have to have a pretty strong basis
Exactly.
so that if we allow a variance in one place, we've got to be specific that is because we're not infringing on any view shed,
Yeah.
stuff like that, so that we don't open it up for other.
and that's for residential as well as commercial across the board,
Yeah.
Special circumstances.
like the Sea Life Center with special circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's just keep it like that.
Okay. Any further discussion on that last topic? Good. Well, thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for running
That's
a
it.
good meeting. Thank you for running a great meeting, Craig.
Adjourned at 8:25.